Hello there, gentle souls. Welcome to tonight's quiet journey through one of the most beautiful mysteries that surrounds us every single day. I can feel you settling in wherever you are, perhaps curled up in bed with the soft glow of your screen, or maybe nestled in a comfortable chair as the day winds down around you. I'm curious, where in this vast world are you joining me from tonight? Are you watching as the sun sets over rolling hills? Or perhaps as city lights begin to twinkle outside your window? What time is it where you are? Is it that magical hour when day surrenders to night? Or maybe you're already deep in the embrace of darkness, ready to let your mind wander into dreams? Tonight, we're going to take the gentlest of walks together through a question that has captivated humans for thousands of years, a question so fundamental that it shapes how we see ourselves and everything around us. We're going to explore what it means to be alive, that mysterious something that separates a singing bird from a silent stone, a growing flower from the soil it springs from, you from the pillow you'll soon rest your head upon. Before we begin our contemplative stroll, if you find yourself enjoying these quiet moments of wonder, I'd be so grateful if you'd take a moment to let me know with a gentle like, and if you'd like to join me for more of these peaceful explorations, a subscription would mean the world to me. These small gestures help our little community of curious minds find each other in this vast digital landscape. Now, I should warn you, and this is both a promise and a gentle caution, tonight's topic might be so fascinating, so beautifully intricate, that you might find yourself more awake than when we started. If that happens, don't worry, sometimes the mind needs to wander through wonder before it can find its way to rest. Think of our conversation tonight as a lullaby for your curiosity, something to carry with you into your dreams. What makes something alive? It's a question that seems so simple at first glance, yet the deeper we venture into it, the more beautifully complex it becomes. Like a gentle stream that appears calm on the surface but reveals intricate currents and hidden depths when we peer closer, the boundary between life and not life is far more mysterious and wonderful than we might first imagine. So take a deep breath with me. Let your shoulders relax. Allow yourself to sink a little deeper into comfort. Tonight, we're not rushing anywhere. We're simply going to wander together, to explore, to let our minds drift through some of the most profound questions humans have ever asked. Are you ready? Let's begin our gentle journey into the beautiful mystery of what it means to be alive. Let's take our first gentle step into this mystery by asking what might seem like the most obvious question: what do we actually mean when we say something is alive? Imagine you're walking through a peaceful garden in the early morning. The dew still clings to spider webs like tiny diamonds, and the air carries the fresh scent of earth and growing things. You see a butterfly land on a flower, its wings moving in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Nearby, a snail slides silently across a wet stone, leaving a shimmering trail behind. In the soil beneath your feet, millions of tiny organisms are busy transforming dead leaves into rich earth. All around you, life seems obvious, doesn't it? But now imagine you're a scientist from another world, visiting Earth for the first time, trying to understand what makes all these moving, growing, changing things different from the rocks and water and air around them. How would you begin to define what you're observing? This is precisely the challenge that has occupied some of humanity's greatest minds for centuries, and their attempts to answer it have led us down the most wonderfully winding paths of discovery. In the 1940s and 1950s, as biology was becoming more rigorous and scientific, researchers began trying to create a formal definition of life. They observed living things carefully and noticed patterns, characteristics that seemed to appear again and again in everything we instinctively recognized as alive. They created what we might think of as a gentle checklist, a series of criteria that something needed to meet to be considered truly alive. Let's walk through these criteria together, like strolling through different rooms in a house, each one revealing another aspect of this thing we call life. The first room we enter is growth. Living things grow, not just in size but in complexity. A seed doesn't just get bigger, it transforms into something entirely different, more intricate, more organized. Think of how a tiny acorn contains within itself the potential for a mighty oak tree, complete with thousands of leaves, a vast root system, and the ability to produce thousands more acorns. That's not just expansion, that's a kind of magic we call development. Moving to the next room, we find reproduction. Living things make more of themselves, passing along their essential characteristics to the next generation. Sometimes this happens through the joining of two organisms, like when flowers release pollen into the wind, hoping it will find its way to another flower of the same species. Sometimes it's simpler. A bacterium simply divides itself in two, creating an identical copy. But in all cases, there's this beautiful drive to continue, to persist through time by creating the future. In the third room, we discover metabolism, perhaps one of the most essential and mysterious aspects of life. Living things take in energy and materials from their environment and transform them into the substances they need to survive and grow. Your body right now is performing thousands of chemical reactions every second, breaking down the food you ate earlier today and using it to repair cells, fuel your thoughts, keep your heart beating. Even as you lie still, you are a bustling chemical factory, a symphony of molecular transformations. The fourth room reveals response to environment. Living things don't just exist in their surroundings, they actively respond to them. Plants turn their leaves toward the sun, seeking the light they need for survival. Your pupils dilate in dim light and contract in brightness. When you hear an unexpected sound, your body immediately prepares for action, even before your conscious mind has processed what you've heard. Life is always in conversation with its environment. In the fifth room, we find homeostasis, the remarkable ability of living things to maintain internal stability despite external changes. Your body temperature stays remarkably constant, whether you're in a cool room or warm sunshine. Trees maintain the chemical balance in their cells despite seasonal changes in soil conditions. This isn't passive, it's an active, constant process of adjustment and regulation. The sixth room contains organization. Living things are highly organized, with complex structures that work together in coordinated ways. Even the simplest bacterium is more organized than the most sophisticated machine humans have ever built. Consider your hand, millions of cells working together, each one containing thousands of molecular machines, all coordinated to allow you to turn these pages or scroll through this text. And in the seventh and final room of our traditional definition, we find evolution, the ability of living things to change over time, to adapt to new conditions, to become something new, while retaining something essential of what they were. For decades, this seemed like a complete and satisfying definition. If something exhibited all 7 characteristics, it was alive. If it didn't, it wasn't. Simple, clear, reassuring. But, as often happens in science, the more we learned, the more complicated things became. The boundaries we thought were so clear began to blur, like watercolors running together on wet paper. Consider viruses, those tiny packages of genetic material that exist at the very edge of our definition. They can reproduce but only inside other living cells. They evolve rapidly, but they don't grow or metabolize on their own. Are they alive? Half alive? Something else entirely? Or consider prions, infectious proteins that can reproduce themselves by converting normal proteins into copies of themselves. They have no DNA, no cells, no metabolism as we understand it. Yet they can spread, they can evolve, they can affect other organisms in profound ways. How do they fit into our neat categories? And what about the countless chemical reactions happening in deep-sea volcanic vents, where simple molecules combine and recombine in increasingly complex patterns, exhibiting some properties we associate with life but not others? Or the way fire spreads and grows and reproduces itself and responds to its environment? Or the way crystals organize themselves into complex, beautiful structures? The more we've learned about life, the more we've realized that our simple 7-room house might not be big enough to contain all the wonders we're discovering. Life, it seems, is not a thing but a process, not a noun but a verb. It's not something that exists in discrete packages, but something that emerges from the interaction of countless smaller parts. Think of a jazz ensemble improvising together. No single musician is creating the music, yet something beautiful emerges from their interaction, something that exists only in the spaces between them, in their response to each other, in the patterns that arise and dissolve and arise again. Life might be something like that, an improvisation between chemistry and environment, between order and chaos, between stability and change. This realization has led some scientists to suggest that instead of asking, what makes something alive, we might be better served asking how alive is it? recognizing that life might exist on a spectrum rather than as a simple yes or no category. But even as our definitions become more nuanced and complex, the wonder remains. Whether we're looking at the 7 traditional characteristics or exploring more fluid concepts of life, we're still faced with the same beautiful mystery. Somehow, somewhere along the way, the universe learned to organize itself in ways that persist through time, that respond to change, that create beauty and complexity and awareness. As we settle into this mystery, let's allow ourselves to feel both the satisfaction of what we do understand and the humbling excitement of how much we still don't know. Because in that space between knowledge and mystery, between the defined and the indefinable, we find some of the most beautiful questions humans have ever asked. Now let's venture into one of the most fascinating territories in all of science, that strange, shimmering borderland where life meets not life, where our neat definitions begin to dissolve like sugar in warm water. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast ocean at twilight. The waves roll in and out, and you notice how impossible it is to say exactly where the ocean ends and the shore begins. Is it at the highest point the waves reach? At the low tide mark? Somewhere in between? The boundary shifts constantly, and the more closely you look, the more you realize that the ocean and the shore are not separate things but part of one continuous, ever-changing system. This is what it's like when we explore the edges of life. The closer we look, the more we discover that the boundary between living and non-living is not a sharp line, but a gradual transition, a region of beautiful ambiguity where some of the most important questions about existence reveal themselves. Let's begin our exploration with viruses, those enigmatic entities that have puzzled scientists for over a century. When the Russian botanist Dmitry Ivanovsky first discovered them in 1892, he called them contagious living fluid because they were too small to see yet clearly had effects on living organisms. Today, we know viruses are far from fluid, but that early description captures something essential about their mysterious nature. A virus, in its simplest form, is like a message in a bottle thrown into the sea of life. It's a piece of genetic information wrapped in a protein shell containing instructions for making more of itself. But here's the fascinating thing. Outside of a living cell, a virus is completely inert. It doesn't grow, doesn't metabolize, doesn't respond to its environment. It's more like a complex crystal than anything we'd typically call alive. But the moment a virus encounters the right kind of cell, like a key finding its lock, everything changes. The virus attaches to the cell's surface, injects its genetic material, and suddenly the cell becomes a virus factory. The viral instructions override the cell's normal activities, redirecting all its machinery toward making new viruses. It's like a computer programmer inserting new code into a running program, completely changing what the program does. During this process, is the virus alive? It's certainly active, reproducing, evolving. Many viruses even compete with each other inside the same cell, with different viral strains fighting for resources. Some viruses have been found to attack other viruses, like predators hunting prey, but they can only do all this by borrowing the machinery of life from their hosts. It's as if viruses exist in a state of potential life. They carry all the information needed to participate in the processes we call living, but they need to borrow the actual mechanisms from organisms that are unambiguously alive. They're like musical compositions that exist only as written notes until a musician breathes life into them by playing them. This has led some scientists to describe viruses as organisms at the edge of life or living things that are not alive. Others prefer to think of them as complex chemicals that have learned to evolve. Still others suggest that viruses represent an entirely different category of existence, neither alive nor dead, but something unique. But viruses are just the beginning of our journey through this borderland. Let's venture deeper and encounter prions, infectious proteins that manage to reproduce themselves without any DNA or RNA at all. Prions were discovered in the 1960s by a physician named Carlton Gajdusek, who was studying a mysterious disease called Kuru that affected the 4 people of Papua New Guinea. What he found challenged everything scientists thought they knew about infection and reproduction. A prion is essentially a protein that is folded into the wrong shape. Imagine a piece of origami that's been crumpled and then somehow learned to convince other pieces of paper to crumple themselves in exactly the same way. When a misfolded prion protein comes into contact with a normally folded protein of the same type, it causes the normal protein to refold into the same abnormal shape. This new misfolded protein can then go on to convert more proteins, creating a chain reaction of shape changing that spreads through an organism like a very slow fire. Prions cause devastating diseases: mad cow disease, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans, scrapie in sheep. But from a scientific perspective, they're absolutely fascinating because they represent reproduction and inheritance without any genetic material at all. The information that gets passed along is not stored in DNA or RNA, but in the shape of the protein itself. Think about how radical this is. For decades, we believed that reproduction required genes, DNA or RNA that could be copied and passed on. But prions show us that form itself can be infectious, that shape can be inherited. It's like discovering that architectural styles can literally reproduce themselves by convincing other buildings to change their structure. Some scientists have speculated that prion-like processes might have been important in the earliest stages of life on Earth, before DNA and RNA evolved. Perhaps the first step toward life was the development of molecules that could convince other molecules to adopt their shape, a kind of primitive reproduction based on form rather than information. As we continue our journey through this borderland, we encounter another fascinating category: viroids. These are even simpler than viruses, just naked pieces of RNA, usually only a few hundred nucleotides long, with no protein shell at all. Yet they can infect plants, reproduce themselves, and evolve. They're like viral haikus, the absolute minimum amount of information needed to achieve something resembling life. Viroids were discovered in the 1970s when scientists were investigating diseases in potato and tomato plants. What they found was genetic material that could reproduce and evolve, but was far simpler than anything previously known. Some viroids are so small that they contain only enough information to specify their own structure. They're self-describing poems written in the language of RNA. The existence of viroids raises profound questions about the minimum requirements for lifelike behavior. If something as simple as a short strand of RNA can exhibit reproduction and evolution, what does that tell us about the nature of life itself? But perhaps the most mysterious inhabitants of our borderland are the giant viruses, organisms so large and complex that they blur the line between viruses and bacteria. The first giant virus, mimivirus, was discovered in 1992, but wasn't recognized as a virus until 2003 because it was simply too big. It's larger than some bacteria and contains nearly 1,000 genes, more than some cellular organisms. What makes giant viruses so intriguing is that they seem to be evolving toward cellular life. Some giant viruses have genes for making proteins, for energy metabolism, even for DNA repair, functions that regular viruses always borrow from their hosts. It's as if we're watching evolution in action, seeing viruses gradually acquire the characteristics we associate with proper living organisms. Even more fascinating, giant viruses can themselves be infected by smaller viruses called virophages, viruses that attack viruses. This creates a whole ecosystem of viral interactions that mirrors the predator-prey relationships we see in cellular life. Some giant viruses even have their own immune systems to defend against virophages. As we explore these remarkable entities, we begin to see that the borderland between life and not life is not empty space, but a rich ecosystem of intermediate forms, each one revealing something new about the possible ways matter can organize itself to persist and reproduce. Consider the recent discovery of viral dark matter, genetic sequences found in environmental samples that don't match any known viruses or cellular organisms. These mysterious genetic fragments suggest that there may be entire categories of life, like entities that we haven't even begun to understand, existing in environments we've barely explored. Or think about the origins of mitochondria and chloroplasts, the structures inside our cells that produce energy. We now know these were once free-living bacteria that were engulfed by early cells billions of years ago. Over time, they became so integrated with their hosts that they're now essential parts of every animal and plant cell. The line between parasite and partner, between separate organism and cellular component, completely dissolved. This process, called endosymbiosis, shows us that the boundaries of individual organisms are far more fluid than we might imagine. You are not just you, you're a collaborative effort between your human cells and the bacterial descendants that power them. In a very real sense, you are a walking ecosystem, a community of organisms that have learned to function as one. As we contemplate these mysteries, we begin to see that the question, what makes something alive, might be asking us to draw lines where none really exist. Life doesn't exist in isolation, but emerges from relationships, between molecules, between organisms, between genes and environments. It's not a thing, but a process, not a substance, but a pattern of organization that persists through time. The borderland between life and not life teaches us humility. It reminds us that our categories, however useful, are human constructs overlaid on a reality that is far more fluid and interconnected than our language can easily capture. In this space of uncertainty and wonder, we find not confusion but richness, a universe far more creative and surprising than we ever imagined. As we prepare to venture even deeper into these mysteries, let's carry with us this sense of wonder at the beautiful ambiguity of existence, the way the universe seems to delight in creating entities that challenge our understanding and expand our sense of what's possible. Let's take a gentle step back in time now, not just years or centuries, but billions of years, to that extraordinary moment when our planet first learned the secret of life. Imagine, if you will, the Earth as a young world, perhaps 4 billion years ago, raw and restless, and utterly unlike the gentle blue marble we know today. Picture a landscape of smoking volcanoes and boiling seas, where lightning splits the sky almost constantly, and the very air seems to shimmer with possibility. The atmosphere contains no oxygen as we know it, but instead methane and ammonia and hydrogen, gases that would be poisonous to us, but were the essential ingredients for the greatest transformation in our planet's history. This is the stage upon which one of the universe's most remarkable magic tricks was performed, the transformation of simple chemistry into the complex symphony we call life. It's a story that reads like the most beautiful fairy tale ever told, except it's absolutely true, written in the rocks and the genes and the very cells of every living thing on Earth. To understand this ancient alchemy, we need to begin with something that might seem almost mundane, the behavior of carbon atoms in warm water. Carbon, that modest element that forms the backbone of every living thing, has a remarkable property. It can form stable bonds with 4 other atoms at once, creating structures of almost infinite complexity and variety. In the early Earth's warm seas, dissolved carbon compounds began to interact in increasingly sophisticated ways. Simple molecules bumped into each other in the eternal dance of chemistry, sometimes sticking together to form larger, more complex structures. Most of these combinations were unstable and quickly fell apart, but occasionally, perhaps once in millions of tries, a combination would form that had a remarkable property. It could encourage the formation of more molecules just like itself. Think of it like this. Imagine a dance where most dancers simply bump into each other and move on. But occasionally, 2 dancers discover a step that's so beautiful and harmonious that it inspires other dancers around them to learn the same step. Gradually, the random collision of individual dancers transforms into a coordinated performance. This is essentially what happened in those ancient seas. Random chemical reactions gradually gave way to autocatalytic cycles, chemical processes that catalyze their own reproduction. A molecule would form that could help create the building blocks needed to make more of itself. These building blocks would then come together to form new copies of the original molecule, which could then help create even more building blocks. It's important to pause here and feel the wonder of what we're describing. We're talking about the moment when chemistry learned to remember itself, when random molecular collisions became organized into persistent patterns. This wasn't life as we know it yet, but it was the first glimmer of something that could persist through time, something that could grow and reproduce and evolve. One of the most beautiful theories about how this transformation occurred is called the RNA world hypothesis. RNA, as you may know, is like DNA's more versatile cousin. It can store genetic information like DNA does, but it can also act as an enzyme, catalyzing chemical reactions. This dual ability makes RNA uniquely suited to be both the memory and the machinery of early life. Imagine an ancient tide pool, warmed by volcanic heat and rich in the chemical building blocks of RNA. Through countless trials and errors spanning millions of years, these building blocks occasionally assembled into short RNA chains that had the remarkable ability to make copies of themselves. These self-replicating RNA molecules were like molecular poets, writing copies of their own poems. But here's where the story becomes even more beautiful. These early RNA replicators weren't perfect. They made mistakes, copying errors that created slight variations in each new generation. Most of these variations were unsuccessful, producing RNA molecules that couldn't replicate effectively. But, occasionally, an error would create an RNA molecule that was actually better at replicating than its parent. This was the birth of evolution, not as a process that acts on living things, but as the very mechanism by which chemistry learned to become life. Natural selection began operating on these molecular replicators, favoring those that could copy themselves more quickly, more accurately, or in more challenging environments. Over millions of years, these RNA systems became increasingly sophisticated. Some RNA molecules specialized in storing information, others in catalyzing reactions. They began to cooperate, with different RNA molecules performing different functions within the same replicating system. Eventually, these RNA systems learned to build protective shells around themselves, the first cell membranes. The emergence of these early cells was like the invention of the first houses. Suddenly, the molecular machinery of life could be contained and concentrated, protected from the chaos of the external environment. Chemical reactions that had been scattered throughout the ocean could now be coordinated within tiny cellular spaces, making life far more efficient and complex. But perhaps the most remarkable development was the invention of photosynthesis, the ability to capture energy directly from sunlight. The first photosynthetic organisms were probably similar to modern cyanobacteria, and their impact on Earth was revolutionary. For the first time, life could create its own food from simple ingredients, carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight. These early photosynthetic organisms were so successful that they fundamentally changed the chemistry of our entire planet. They pumped oxygen into the atmosphere as a waste product of photosynthesis, oxygen that was actually toxic to most of the life forms that existed at the time. This event, called the Great Oxidation Event, was the first environmental crisis caused by life itself, and it led to the extinction of many early organisms. But it also opened up entirely new possibilities. Oxygen, while toxic in some ways, could also be used as a powerful source of energy through respiration. Organisms that learned to use oxygen for energy could extract far more power from their food than those that relied on earlier chemical processes. This energy revolution made possible the evolution of larger, more complex organisms. As we contemplate this ancient story, we begin to see that the emergence of life wasn't a single miraculous event, but a gradual process of increasing organization and complexity. Each step built upon the previous one, creating new possibilities that hadn't existed before. The transition from chemistry to biology wasn't like flipping a switch, but more like watching a sunrise, a gradual brightening, where it becomes impossible to say exactly when night becomes day. Simple chemical reactions became autocatalytic cycles, which became self-replicating systems, which became primitive cells, which became the incredible diversity of life we see today. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this story is that it's still happening. Right now, in hydrothermal vents deep in the ocean, in the hot springs of Yellowstone, in environments that might resemble those early Earth conditions, chemistry continues to explore new forms of organization. The boundary between chemistry and biology remains active, creative, full of possibilities we're only beginning to understand. Recent research has revealed that some of the chemical processes thought to be essential for life can occur spontaneously under conditions that might have existed on early Earth. Scientists have observed the spontaneous formation of cell-like structures in laboratory simulations of early Earth conditions. They've seen simple chemical systems exhibit evolution-like behavior, with more successful variants becoming more common over time. This ongoing research suggests that the emergence of life might not have been a nearly impossible accident, but rather a probable outcome of chemistry operating under the right conditions. The universe, it seems, has a natural tendency toward increasing complexity and organization, a tendency that eventually flowers into the phenomenon we call life. As we float here in contemplation of these ancient mysteries, we might ask ourselves, what does it mean for us to be the current expression of this 4-billion-year-old process? Every atom in our bodies was forged in the heart of stars, every molecule shaped by billions of years of chemical evolution, every cell carrying the memory of that first spark of organization that emerged in Earth's early seas. We are not separate from this ancient alchemy. We are its latest chapter, the most recent verse in the universe's ongoing poem of increasing complexity and awareness. The same chemical processes that first learned to dance in those primordial seas continue to dance within us, sustaining our lives, enabling our thoughts, making possible our capacity to wonder about our own origins. As we continue our gentle journey through the mysteries of life, we arrive at perhaps the most profound question of all. When and how did life develop the remarkable ability to be aware of itself? When did the universe, through the medium of living organisms, first open its eyes and begin to wonder about its own existence? This is the mystery of consciousness, that strange, wonderful phenomenon that allows you to be aware that you're reading these words right now, that creates the inner experience of being you. It's what transforms a biological machine into a sentient being, what makes the difference between a sophisticated computer and a dreaming mind. Let's begin our exploration by settling into the comfortable paradox that consciousness presents. Right now, as you read these words, billions of neurons in your brain are firing in coordinated patterns, creating electrical and chemical cascades that somehow, and we still don't fully understand how, give rise to your subjective experience of understanding, of being present, of being aware. It's like discovering that if you arrange matter in just the right way, it suddenly develops an interior life, a private experience that exists nowhere else in the universe. The hydrogen that was forged in the hearts of ancient stars, the carbon that formed in stellar explosions, the oxygen that was exhaled by early photosynthetic organisms, all of these elements have somehow organized themselves into structures capable of experiencing wonder, joy, curiosity, and the gentle fatigue you might be feeling as this long day draws to a close. But consciousness didn't emerge all at once, like a light bulb suddenly switching on. Instead, it developed gradually through the long history of life on Earth, emerging in layers like the slow accumulation of sediment that forms beautiful geological strata over millions of years. The earliest hint of awareness might have appeared in the very first living cells, billions of years ago. Even the simplest bacteria exhibit a primitive form of consciousness-like behavior. They can sense their environment, distinguish between favorable and unfavorable conditions, and move toward what they need and away from what might harm them. Consider the humble E. coli bacterium, no larger than a tiny speck of dust, yet capable of remarkably sophisticated behavior. It can sense the concentration of nutrients in its environment and swim toward higher concentrations using a process called chemotaxis. It can even remember recent conditions and compare them to current ones, swimming more enthusiastically when conditions are improving and less enthusiastically when they're getting worse. This might seem like simple chemistry, and in one sense it is, but it's also the foundation of all awareness. The bacterium is sensing its world, processing information about that world, and responding in ways that increase its chances of survival. It's primitive, yes, but it's also the earliest expression of the capacity that would eventually flower into human consciousness. As life evolved and became more complex, so did the capacity for awareness. The development of multicellular organisms allowed for the emergence of specialized cells dedicated to sensing and responding to the environment. The first nervous systems. These early neural networks were simple, perhaps just a few dozen cells that could coordinate basic responses to light, touch, or chemical signals. But even these simple nervous systems represented a revolutionary development in the evolution of consciousness. For the first time, information about the external world could be integrated and processed in a central location, creating the possibility of more sophisticated responses to environmental challenges. Imagine the first creature with a simple eye spot, perhaps something like a modern jellyfish or sea anemone. Suddenly, This organism could distinguish between light and dark, could sense the approach of a potential predator or the presence of prey. This wasn't just a mechanical response, but the beginning of a model of the world, an internal representation of external reality. As nervous systems became more complex, they developed the ability to create increasingly sophisticated models of the environment. The evolution of actual eyes, with their ability to form images, represented another quantum leap in the development of consciousness. Suddenly, organisms could navigate complex visual environments, recognize specific objects, even predict the behavior of other creatures. But perhaps the most significant development in the evolution of consciousness was the emergence of brains, centralized collections of neurons that could integrate information from multiple senses, store memories, and use past experience to guide future behavior. The first brains were tiny, simple structures, but they introduced something revolutionary: the ability to represent not just the current state of the environment, but also past states and possible future states. This created the foundation for planning, for imagination, for the kind of mental time travel that allows us to learn from the past and prepare for the future. As we trace the evolution of consciousness through the history of life, we see a beautiful progression from simple awareness to increasingly sophisticated forms of experience. Fish developed the ability to learn and remember. Amphibians and reptiles evolved more complex behaviors and emotional responses. Early mammals developed the capacity for social bonding and parental care. But something extraordinary happened with the evolution of warm-blooded animals, birds, and mammals. The high metabolic rates required to maintain constant body temperature also made possible much more complex and energy-intensive neural processes. Suddenly, brains could support not just awareness and learning, but also creativity, playfulness, and the beginning of something we might recognize as imagination. Watch a young mammal at play, a kitten pouncing on a shadow, a puppy wrestling with its siblings, a young dolphin riding the wake of a boat just for the joy of it. This is consciousness at play, exploring possibilities just for the pleasure of exploration, creating experiences that serve no immediate survival function but enrich the inner life of the creature. Some animals went even further, developing what we call metacognition, awareness of their own awareness. Dolphins recognize themselves in mirrors. Elephants seem to mourn their dead and show empathy for the suffering of others. Great apes use tools, plan for future events, and appear to have a sense of self that persists through time. But perhaps no development in the evolution of consciousness has been as revolutionary as the emergence of language. Language doesn't just allow organisms to communicate about their environment. It allows them to create shared models of reality, to pool their knowledge and experience, to build collective memories that persist beyond the lifetime of any individual. With language came the ability to think about thinking, to examine our own mental processes, to wonder about the nature of existence itself. We became capable of asking not just what is that, but why do I experience it? And what does it mean to have experiences at all? This is what we see in human consciousness. Not just awareness of the world around us, but awareness of our own awareness, the capacity to examine our own thoughts and feelings, to wonder about the nature of consciousness itself. We can contemplate our own mortality, imagine worlds that don't exist, create art and music and stories that exist nowhere but in the realm of consciousness. But human consciousness is not the end of the story. Just as early bacteria couldn't have imagined the complexity of mammalian awareness, we might not be able to imagine what forms of consciousness could still evolve. Some scientists speculate about the possibility of collective consciousness, where individual minds could link together to create new forms of shared awareness. Others wonder about the consciousness of artificial intelligences, and whether the patterns of information processing in silicon chips could eventually give rise to genuine subjective experience. If consciousness is truly about information integration and processing, then there's no fundamental reason why it couldn't emerge in non-biological systems. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of consciousness is not where it's going, but where it is right now. In this moment, as you read these words and contemplate these ideas, you are the universe becoming aware of itself. You are the cosmos looking back on its own history and marveling at the journey that led from simple chemistry to this moment of understanding. The atoms that make up your brain are the same atoms that were present at the birth of the universe, forged in the hearts of dying stars, shaped by billions of years of cosmic evolution. And now, through the remarkable process we call consciousness, those atoms have organized themselves in such a way that they can contemplate their own existence, can feel wonder and joy and love, can ask questions about the nature of reality itself. This is perhaps the most extraordinary fact about consciousness, not just that it exists, but that it allows the universe to experience beauty, to create meaning, to transform mere existence into something rich with purpose and wonder. Through consciousness, the cosmos has learned not just to exist, but to appreciate its own existence, to find joy in its own complexity, to love its own creative potential. As you drift towards sleep tonight, you might take a moment to appreciate this remarkable gift. Not just the gift of being alive, but the even more extraordinary gift of being aware that you're alive, of being a part of the universe that has learned to experience wonder. As we float gently through our exploration of life's mysteries, let's turn our attention to one of the most fascinating developments of our time: the emergence of life as technology, and technology as life. We stand at a remarkable moment in the history of our planet, where the boundary between the biological and the artificial is becoming as beautifully blurred as the boundary between life and non-life that we explored earlier. Imagine, if you will, walking through a laboratory of the near future. In one corner, bacteria have been engineered to produce life-saving medicines, their cellular machinery repurposed to become tiny pharmaceutical factories. In another corner, scientists are assembling DNA letter by letter, writing the genetic instructions for organisms that have never existed in nature. And in a third corner, artificial intelligence systems are designing proteins with functions that evolution never imagined, creating biological tools with the precision of master craftsmen. This is not science fiction, but science fact, the reality of synthetic biology, where life itself becomes a medium for technological innovation. It's a field that challenges our most fundamental assumptions about what it means to be alive and forces us to reconsider the relationship between the natural and the artificial. The story of synthetic biology begins with a simple but profound realization. Living organisms are, in many ways, remarkably sophisticated biological machines. Every cell is a complex system of molecular components working together with precision that surpasses any human-made technology. DNA serves as a kind of biological hard drive, storing information. RNA acts like temporary memory and messaging systems. Proteins function as molecular machines, catalyzing reactions, building structures, and carrying out the countless tasks necessary for life. Once scientists began to understand these biological systems in mechanistic terms, an obvious question arose: if living organisms are natural machines, couldn't we learn to engineer them the way we engineer other complex systems? This question led to the birth of synthetic biology in the early 2000s, pioneered by researchers who brought an engineering mindset to the study of life. Instead of just observing how natural organisms work, they began trying to design biological systems from the ground up, using the same principles that engineers use to design cars, computers, or buildings. One of the first major successes in this field was the creation of the genetic toggle switch, a simple biological circuit that could be programmed into bacteria to make them switch between two different states, like a biological on-off switch. It sounds simple, but it represented something revolutionary: the ability to program living cells like we program computers. Soon, scientists were creating biological systems of increasing complexity. They designed bacteria that could function as living environmental sensors, glowing green when they encountered specific pollutants. They created biological clocks that could keep time as precisely as electronic circuits. They even built biological memory systems that could store and retrieve information using DNA. But perhaps the most remarkable achievement in synthetic biology came in 2010, when scientist Craig Venter and his team created the world's first synthetic life form, a bacterium whose entire genome had been synthesized artificially in the laboratory. They called it Synthia, and while it was based on a naturally occurring species, every letter of its genetic code had been written by human hands and machines. Creating Synthia was like writing a novel in a language of 4 letters, A, T, G, and C, that when read by the right cellular machinery told the complete story of how to build and operate a living organism. It took years of painstaking work, but the result was undeniably alive, Cynthia could reproduce, evolve, and carry out all the functions we associate with life, despite being entirely artificial in origin. This achievement forced us to confront some profound questions about the nature of life itself. If we can create life artificially, what does that say about the uniqueness of natural life? Are synthetic organisms truly alive in the same sense as natural ones? And what responsibilities do we have as creators of new forms of life? But Cynthia was just the beginning. Scientists soon moved beyond copying existing organisms to designing entirely new forms of life with capabilities that evolution had never produced. They created bacteria that could eat plastic waste and convert it into useful chemicals. They designed algae that could produce jet fuel directly from sunlight and carbon dioxide. They even created organisms that could survive in environments that would be instantly lethal to any natural life form. One of the most beautiful applications of synthetic biology has been in medicine. Scientists have learned to reprogram immune cells to fight cancer more effectively, turning the body's own defense systems into precision weapons against disease. They've created biological sensors that can detect diseases at incredibly early stages, and biological delivery systems that can carry medicines directly to specific cells in the body. But synthetic biology goes beyond just engineering existing organisms. Scientists are now working on creating entirely artificial life forms, organisms built from the ground up, using synthetic components. These efforts include creating cells with synthetic DNA bases that don't exist in nature, organisms with entirely artificial protein structures, and even attempts to create life using completely different chemical systems than those found in natural organisms. Imagine organisms that use silicon instead of carbon as their structural backbone, or that employ metals in ways that natural organisms never could. These synthetic life forms might be able to survive in environments like the surface of Mars or the interior of computer chips, opening up possibilities for life that we can barely begin to imagine. But as we develop these remarkable capabilities, we also encounter profound ethical and philosophical questions. If we can create life, do we become responsible for the welfare of the organisms we create? If synthetic organisms can evolve and change, how do we ensure that they don't develop in ways we didn't intend or don't want? There's also the question of environmental impact. What happens if synthetic organisms escape into natural ecosystems? How do we balance the tremendous potential benefits of synthetic biology with the need to preserve the natural world that gave rise to life in the first place? These questions become even more complex when we consider the possibility of enhancing human beings themselves through synthetic biology. Scientists are already working on ways to edit human genes to prevent inherited diseases, but the same technologies could potentially be used to enhance human capabilities, to make us stronger, smarter, more resistant to disease, or even to extend our lifespans dramatically. This raises profound questions about what it means to be human. If we can redesign ourselves at the genetic level, are we still the same species that evolved through natural selection? Or are we becoming something new, a synthetic species that designs its own evolution? But perhaps the most intriguing possibility raised by synthetic biology is the prospect of creating artificial intelligence using biological systems. Scientists are already working on biological computers, systems that use DNA and proteins to store and process information. These biological computers could potentially be far more efficient and sophisticated than electronic ones, and they might even be capable of evolving and improving themselves. Imagine an artificial intelligence that is literally alive, a synthetic organism whose biology is designed to process information and make decisions. Such a being would blur the line between artificial and natural intelligence in ways that could revolutionize our understanding of both life and consciousness. As we contemplate these possibilities, we begin to see that synthetic biology is not just about creating new tools or solving practical problems. It's about fundamentally reimagining the relationship between life and technology, between the natural and the artificial, between what exists and what could exist. We're entering an era where life itself becomes a medium for creativity and innovation, where the boundaries between the biological and the technological dissolve, where the question is not just, what is life, but what could life become? This transformation requires us to think deeply about our responsibilities as creators of new forms of life. We're not just engineers building machines, but gardeners cultivating new forms of existence. The organisms we create will have their own experiences, their own needs, their own place in the web of life on Earth. As we design these new forms of life, we're also designing the future of our planet, and perhaps the future of life itself. The choices we make today about how to develop and deploy synthetic biology will shape the world our children and their children will inherit. In this sense, synthetic biology represents both a tremendous opportunity and a tremendous responsibility. We have the chance to solve some of humanity's greatest challenges, to create sustainable sources of energy, to develop new medicines, to clean up environmental damage, to explore new worlds. But we also have the responsibility to do so thoughtfully, ethically, and with deep respect for the natural world that made our existence possible. As you drift toward sleep tonight, you might reflect on the remarkable moment in history we're living through, a time when life itself is becoming technology, and technology is becoming life, when the ancient process of evolution is being joined by the new process of design, and when the future of life on Earth is being shaped not just by natural selection, but by human creativity and wisdom. Now let's take a gentle dive into one of the most mysterious and beautiful territories at the very foundations of life itself, the quantum world, where the strange rules of physics meet the elegant machinery of biology in ways that are only now beginning to be understood. As you settle more comfortably into your evening, imagine for a moment that we could shrink ourselves down to the size of a single molecule and take a journey through the interior of a living cell. What we would find there would challenge everything we thought we knew about how the classical world of everyday experience relates to the bizarre quantum realm that exists at the smallest scales of reality. At first glance, it might seem impossible that quantum effects could be important for life. After all, living organisms are warm, wet, and noisy. Exactly the kind of environment where quantum effects are supposed to be destroyed almost instantly. Quantum phenomena are notoriously fragile, typically requiring temperatures close to absolute zero and perfect isolation from environmental interference to be observed in laboratory settings. Yet, over the past few decades, scientists have discovered that life has learned to harness quantum effects in the most elegant and sophisticated ways imaginable. Far from being disrupted by the warm, chaotic environment of living cells, quantum processes appear to be essential for some of the most fundamental processes of life itself. Let's begin our exploration with one of the most beautiful examples, photosynthesis, the process by which plants capture energy from sunlight and convert it into the chemical energy that powers nearly all life on Earth. You might think of photosynthesis as a relatively straightforward process. Sunlight hits a leaf, gets absorbed by chlorophyll, and somehow gets converted into chemical energy. But the reality is far more extraordinary. When a photon of light strikes a chlorophyll molecule, it creates what's called an exciton, a quantum particle that represents the energy of that captured light. This exciton needs to find its way through a complex maze of molecules to reach the reaction center where photosynthesis actually occurs. In the classical world, this would be like trying to navigate through a complex maze by randomly wandering around, bumping into walls until you accidentally find the exit. It would be terribly inefficient, and most of the energy would be lost as heat before it ever reached its destination. But excitons don't behave like classical particles. They behave like quantum waves, and quantum waves can do something absolutely remarkable. They can explore multiple paths through the maze simultaneously. Instead of taking one random path and hoping for the best, the exciton creates a quantum superposition that allows it to test all possible paths at once and then select the most efficient route to the reaction center. This quantum coherence in photosynthesis is so efficient that it approaches the theoretical maximum possible. Nearly 100% of captured light energy is successfully converted into chemical energy. It's like having a GPS system that can see all possible routes simultaneously and always choose the fastest one, except this GPS system is operating at the molecular level and using the strange laws of quantum mechanics. What makes this even more remarkable is that these quantum effects persist for much longer than anyone thought possible in the warm, noisy environment of a living cell. Quantum coherence typically lasts for mere femtoseconds in most systems, but in photosynthetic systems, it can persist for hundreds of femtoseconds or even longer, enough time for the exciton to find its way efficiently to the reaction center. But photosynthesis is just the beginning of our journey into the quantum foundations of life. Let's explore another fundamental process, the way enzymes catalyze chemical reactions. Enzymes are the molecular machines that make life possible, speeding up chemical reactions by factors of millions or even billions. Without enzymes, the chemical reactions necessary for life would occur so slowly that life as we know it simply couldn't exist. But how do enzymes achieve their remarkable efficiency? Classical chemistry suggests that enzymes work by lowering the energy barrier for chemical reactions, making it easier for molecules to transform from one state to another. But this classical picture can't fully explain the extraordinary efficiency of many enzymes. It turns out that many enzymes use quantum tunneling, a quantum mechanical effect where particles can pass through energy barriers that should be impossible according to classical physics. It's like having a ball that can roll through a wall instead of having to roll over it. In enzymatic reactions, atoms or electrons can quantum tunnel from one position to another, allowing chemical transformations to occur much more quickly and efficiently than would be possible through purely classical mechanisms. Some enzymes appear to have evolved specifically to enhance these quantum tunneling effects, creating molecular environments that maximize the probability of quantum mechanical processes. But perhaps the most intriguing frontier in quantum biology is the question of whether quantum effects might be involved in consciousness itself. Some scientists have proposed that the strange, unified nature of conscious experience might be related to quantum coherence in the brain. The idea is controversial and still highly speculative, but it's based on a fascinating observation. Consciousness seems to have a unified, integrated quality that's difficult to explain using classical physics alone. When you look at a red rose, you don't experience separate sensations of redness, softness, and fragrance. You experience a unified perception of rose that somehow integrates all these different aspects into a single, coherent experience. Some researchers have suggested that this unity of consciousness might be related to quantum coherence across networks of neurons, allowing widely separated parts of the brain to function as a single, integrated quantum system. If this turns out to be true, it would mean that consciousness itself is a quantum phenomenon, emerging from the strange laws that govern the microscopic world. While the quantum theory of consciousness remains highly speculative, there's growing evidence that quantum effects are important for other aspects of brain function. For example, some researchers have found evidence for quantum coherence in the microtubules that form the structural framework of neurons, and others have suggested that quantum effects might be involved in the way neurons process and store information. But quantum biology extends beyond individual organisms to questions about the nature of life itself. Some scientists have proposed that the origin of life might have been a quantum phase transition, a sudden change in the quantum state of matter that allowed complex, self-organizing systems to emerge from simpler chemical components. This idea suggests that life didn't arise gradually through a series of small chemical changes, but rather through a sudden, dramatic reorganization of matter at the quantum level. It's like the way water suddenly transforms into ice when it reaches the freezing point, a quantum phase transition where the entire system suddenly reorganizes into a new, more ordered state. If this turns out to be correct, it would mean that life is not just a complex chemical process, but a fundamental quantum phenomenon, as basic to the structure of reality as matter and energy themselves. Another fascinating frontier in quantum biology is the study of quantum effects in bird navigation. Many migratory birds can navigate with extraordinary precision across thousands of miles, and there's growing evidence that they do this using quantum effects in their visual systems. The idea is that certain proteins in birds' eyes can detect the Earth's magnetic field through quantum entanglement, a phenomenon where two particles become connected in such a way that measuring one instantaneously affects the other, regardless of the distance between them. This quantum compass would allow birds to literally see magnetic fields as patterns of light and dark, providing them with a built-in navigation system of extraordinary precision. As we explore these quantum foundations of life, we begin to see that the boundary between physics and biology is far more permeable than we once imagined. Life doesn't just obey the laws of physics. It actively exploits some of the most counterintuitive and mysterious aspects of quantum mechanics to achieve efficiency and capabilities that purely classical systems could never match. This realization is leading to exciting new possibilities in biotechnology and medicine. Scientists are beginning to develop quantum-enhanced biological sensors that could detect diseases at incredibly early stages, quantum biological computers that could process information in entirely new ways, and even quantum-enhanced drug delivery systems that could target specific cells with unprecedented precision. But perhaps the most profound implication of quantum biology is what it tells us about the fundamental nature of life itself. If life depends on quantum effects, then life is not separate from the deepest laws of physics, but intimately connected to them. We are not just complex arrangements of atoms and molecules, but quantum beings, our very existence dependent on the strange, beautiful laws that govern the deepest levels of reality. As you prepare to drift into sleep, you might reflect on the remarkable fact that the very atoms in your body are at this moment engaged in quantum processes that would seem like magic to classical physics, that your thoughts, your dreams, your very consciousness might be emerging from quantum effects that connect you to the deepest mysteries of the universe. In dreams, the classical rules of time and space often dissolve, and impossible things become possible. Perhaps this is fitting, because in the quantum foundations of life, we discover that reality itself is far stranger and more wonderful than our everyday experience suggests. That, at the deepest level, the universe operates more like a dream than like a machine, full of possibilities and mysteries that we're only beginning to understand. As our gentle evening journey draws toward its close, let's step back and contemplate one of the most beautiful and profound truths about life, that no living thing exists in isolation, that every organism is part of an intricate web of relationships that connects all life on Earth in ways both obvious and hidden, both simple and extraordinarily complex. Imagine, if you will, standing in an ancient forest just as the first light of dawn filters through the canopy above. The air is still and cool, filled with the gentle sounds of awakening life, the distant call of a songbird, the rustle of small creatures moving through the underbrush, the almost inaudible whisper of wind through countless leaves. At first glance, you might see this forest as a collection of individual organisms, separate trees, independent animals, distinct plants, each living their own individual lives. But the deeper you look, the more you begin to realize that this apparent separateness is largely an illusion. What you're actually witnessing is one of the most intricate collaborative systems on Earth. A living network of relationships so complex and interconnected that it challenges our very understanding of where one organism ends and another begins. Beneath your feet, invisible to the naked eye, extends what some scientists call the Wood Wide Web, a vast network of fungal threads called mycorrhizae that connects the roots of trees and plants across the entire forest. These fungal networks are like a biological internet, allowing trees to communicate with each other, share resources, and even warn each other of approaching dangers. When a tree is attacked by insects, it can send chemical signals through this fungal network to warn other trees, which then begin producing defensive compounds before the insects even reach them. Parent trees can nurture their offspring by sending them nutrients through these underground connections. Dying trees can transfer their remaining resources to neighboring trees, ensuring that their nutrients continue to support the forest ecosystem even after their own death. This network is so sophisticated that some scientists have begun to think of forests not as collections of individual trees, but as superorganisms. Vast, integrated living systems where the individual trees are more like cells in a larger organism than like separate beings. But the connections extend far beyond the forest floor. Every tree in the forest is home to countless other organisms, bacteria and fungi living on and in its tissues, insects that depend on its leaves and bark, birds that nest in its branches, mammals that shelter in its shade. Each of these organisms, in turn, has its own complex web of relationships with other species. Consider a single oak tree. It might host hundreds of species of insects, each adapted to live on or in specific parts of the tree. These insects provide food for dozens of species of birds, which in turn are hunted by raptors and mammals. The tree's acorns feed squirrels, deer, and wild pigs, which disperse the tree's seeds to new locations. When the tree eventually dies, it becomes home to an entirely different community of organisms, fungi, bacteria, and insects, that specialize in decomposition, returning the tree's nutrients to the soil to feed the next generation of forest growth. But these ecological connections are just the most visible layer of the great web that connects all life. At a deeper level, every living thing on Earth shares a common evolutionary heritage that stretches back billions of years to those first self-replicating molecules in ancient seas. This shared heritage is written in the very structure of our cells. Every living thing on Earth, from the tiniest bacterium to the largest whale, from the simplest algae to the most complex human, shares the same basic biochemistry. We all use DNA to store genetic information, RNA to transmit that information, and proteins to carry out the work of life. We all use the same genetic code, the same basic cellular machinery, the same fundamental metabolic processes. This remarkable similarity is not a coincidence, but evidence of our shared ancestry. Despite the incredible diversity of life on Earth, all organisms are variations on a single theme, different expressions of the same underlying pattern of organization that first emerged billions of years ago. But the connections go even deeper than shared ancestry. Every atom in your body was once part of other organisms, other systems, other worlds. The carbon in your muscles was once part of ancient plants. The calcium in your bones was once part of marine organisms that lived in prehistoric seas. The iron in your blood was forged in the heart of a dying star billions of years ago. You are not just connected to life on Earth, you are literally made from the same material as all other living things, recycled and reorganized countless times throughout the history of our planet. The atoms that make up your body have been part of rocks and rain clouds, plants and animals, other human beings who lived and died long before you were born. This means that in a very real sense, there is no clear boundary between you and the rest of the living world. The air you breathe was exhaled by plants. The water in your body once flowed through countless other organisms. The food you eat becomes part of your body, while the waste products you excrete become nutrients for other forms of life. This constant exchange of matter and energy means that you are not a fixed, permanent entity, but a temporary pattern of organization that exists for a brief moment in the great flow of matter and energy through the biosphere. You are like a wave on the ocean, a real and meaningful pattern, but one that exists only because of the larger system of which it is a part. But the connections that bind all life together go beyond the physical exchange of atoms and molecules. All life on Earth exists within the same planetary system, sharing the same atmosphere, the same oceans, the same cycles of water and carbon and nitrogen that make life possible. The oxygen you breathe was produced by photosynthetic organisms, first ancient cyanobacteria, and now primarily plants and algae. The carbon dioxide you exhale is absorbed by plants and used to build new organic compounds. The water you drink has been cycling through the biosphere for billions of years, falling as rain, flowing through rivers, evaporating from oceans, and passing through countless organisms along the way. These planetary cycles create what scientists call the biosphere, the thin layer of life that surrounds our planet like a living skin. The biosphere is not just the sum of all individual organisms, but an integrated global system where life and environment interact to create conditions that support continued life. The most remarkable thing about the biosphere is how it maintains the conditions necessary for life despite constant changes and challenges. The concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere, the temperature of the planet, the chemistry of the oceans, all of these are actively regulated by the combined activities of all living things working together as an integrated system. This global self-regulation is so sophisticated that some scientists have proposed that the Earth itself should be considered a living organism, a hypothesis called the Gaia theory, named after the ancient Greek goddess of the Earth. While this idea remains controversial, it captures something important about the interconnected nature of life on our planet. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of the great web that connects all life is how it reveals the fundamental unity that underlies apparent diversity. Despite the incredible variety of life forms on Earth, millions of species ranging from microscopic bacteria to towering trees to complex animals, all life shares the same basic needs and faces the same fundamental challenges. All living things need sources of energy and raw materials. All must maintain their internal organization against the constant tendency toward disorder. All must reproduce and pass their characteristics on to future generations. All must adapt to changing conditions and find ways to coexist with other forms of life. These shared challenges have led to the evolution of similar solutions in completely unrelated organisms, a phenomenon called convergent evolution. Eyes have evolved independently dozens of times in different lineages. Flight has been invented separately by insects, birds, bats, and pterosaurs. The ability to echolocate has appeared in both dolphins and bats. Even intelligence and consciousness have emerged independently in various groups, including mammals, birds, and cephalopods. This convergence suggests that there are deep patterns underlying the apparent chaos of evolution, that life tends to discover similar solutions to similar problems regardless of the specific historical pathway it follows. It hints at underlying principles of organization that guide the development of complexity and awareness throughout the living world. As we contemplate these vast webs of connection that link all life together, we begin to see that the question, "What makes something alive?" might be missing something essential. Perhaps life is not primarily about individual organisms, but about relationships, networks, connections, and flows of information and energy that create and sustain complex patterns of organization. From this perspective, you are not just a living organism, but a node in the vast network of life on Earth, connected to every other living thing through chains of relationship that stretch back billions of years and extend forward into an unknowable future. Your thoughts and actions ripple through this network in ways both subtle and profound, influencing the whole web of life in ways you may never fully understand. This interconnectedness brings with it both tremendous privilege and tremendous responsibility. As conscious beings capable of understanding our place in the web of life, we have the unique opportunity to make choices that support and enhance the beauty and complexity of the living world. But we also have the responsibility to consider how our actions affect the intricate relationships that make life possible. As you drift towards sleep tonight, you might reflect on your place in this vast web of connection, how the air you breathe connects you to every plant on Earth, how the water in your body links you to all the oceans, how the atoms in your cells tie you to the stars themselves. You are not separate from life, but one unique and precious expression of the pattern of organization that we call life, connected to every other expression through bonds that are both physical and profound. In dreams, perhaps you will sense these connections more directly, feeling yourself not as an isolated individual, but as part of the great, breathing, growing, evolving community of life that fills our beautiful planet with wonder and possibility. And so we arrive at the end of our gentle evening journey, like travelers who have wandered through a vast and beautiful landscape, and now find themselves at a peaceful resting place where they can look back on all they've seen and contemplate what it means. I wonder, dear companion, where are you now as our conversation draws to a close? Are you still in the same place where we began this exploration, or have you perhaps moved to a more comfortable spot for settling into sleep? What time is it in your world now? Has darkness fully claimed the sky outside your window, or are you still in that magical transition between day and night? Wherever you are and whatever time has passed, we have covered remarkable ground together. We began by asking what seemed like a simple question, what makes something alive? And discovered that this question opens into some of the most profound mysteries the universe has to offer. We've wandered through the traditional definitions of life and found them beautifully inadequate, like trying to capture the ocean in a handful of water. We've explored the mysterious borderlands where life meets not life and discovered entities like viruses and prions that challenge our categories and expand our understanding of what's possible. We've traveled back in time to witness the extraordinary moment when chemistry first learned to dance the dance of life, when simple molecules in ancient seas discovered the secret of self-organization and set in motion the 4 billion-year symphony of evolution that continues to play around us and within us at every moment. We've contemplated the spark of awareness that transformed mere existence into experience, the emergence of consciousness that allows the universe to know itself through the eyes and minds of living beings. We've seen how synthetic biology is blurring the boundaries between the natural and artificial, and how quantum mechanics reveals that life itself is built on the strangest and most wonderful foundations imaginable. And finally, we've stepped back to appreciate the great web of connections that links all life together, the vast network of relationships that makes every organism part of something larger and more beautiful than itself. Through all of these explorations, perhaps what we've discovered most clearly is that life is not a thing but a process, not a substance but a pattern, not a problem to be solved but a mystery to be lived and celebrated. Life is the universe learning to organize itself in ways that persist through time, that respond to change, that create beauty and complexity and awareness. But more than that, life is the universe learning to care about itself, to value its own existence, to find meaning and purpose in the great cosmic dance of matter and energy through space and time. Through consciousness, through love, through our capacity for wonder and creativity and connection, life transforms mere existence into something precious and meaningful. You are part of this magnificent process, this cosmic awakening, this universal learning to love itself. Every breath you take, every thought you think, every moment of wonder you experience is the universe becoming more aware of its own beauty and possibility. The question we began with, what makes something alive, has led us to an even more beautiful question. What does it mean to be a conscious part of this living universe? What does it mean to be matter that has learned to think, atoms that have learned to love, chemistry that has learned to dream? As you prepare to enter the world of dreams, you carry with you all these connections and mysteries. The same processes that first sparked life in ancient seas continue to unfold within you. The same quantum effects that enable photosynthesis enable your thoughts. The same web of relationships that connects all life includes you as one of its most precious and unique expressions. In sleep, perhaps you will continue to explore these mysteries in ways that waking consciousness cannot. Dreams, after all, are consciousness freed from the ordinary constraints of time and space, able to make connections and explore possibilities that daylight thinking might never discover. Perhaps you will dream of the ancient seas where life first began, or of the quantum dances happening within your cells, or of the vast web of connection that links you to every other living thing. Perhaps you will dream of the future of life on Earth and in the cosmos, of the new forms of beauty and awareness that might yet emerge from the endless creativity of the universe. Or perhaps you will simply dream of simpler things, of gardens and forests, of sunlight and water, of the gentle rhythm of breathing and heartbeat that marks your participation in the great dance of life. Whatever you dream, know that in sleeping, you are participating in one of life's most ancient and essential processes. Sleep is not an absence of life, but a different mode of being alive. A time when the conscious mind steps back and allows deeper processes of healing and integration to unfold. As you settle into rest, you might take a moment to appreciate the remarkable gift of being alive in this moment, in this place, in this universe that has learned to contemplate its own existence through your awareness. You are not just observing the mystery of life, you are participating in it, embodying it, expressing it in ways that have never existed before and will never exist again. Thank you for taking this gentle journey with me tonight. Thank you for your curiosity, your openness, your willingness to explore these profound questions with the kind of wonder that makes life meaningful. In sharing these contemplations with you, I have been reminded once again of how beautiful and mysterious it is to be alive in this extraordinary universe. And now, as the final wisps of our conversation dissolve into the approaching peace of sleep, let me leave you with this thought. You are not just alive, you are life itself, awakening to its own beauty, marveling at its own complexity, loving its own infinite creativity. You are the universe dreaming of itself. Sleep well, dear wanderer, dream beautifully, and when you wake, you will still be part of the greatest mystery and the most wonderful adventure that existence has to offer, the adventure of being alive. Good night.